which the Commonwealth Government has under the Constitution to overrule the states. In the case of Tasmania, despite the fact that under a Labor government they had a referendum of the people in that state who voted overwhelmingly to build the dam, and then subsequently the grey Liberal government was elected who supported very strongly the building of the dam because they needed it for the economic development of their state. The Fraser government put the Franklin Dam area on the World Heritage List. Now, the World Heritage List is controlled by UNESCO, the United Nations Educational and Cultural Organisation, which the United States have said they are going to get out of because of its communist third world bias and its opposition to the Western civilization. While the United States is taking this move and other countries ignore UNESCO and the so-called World Heritage List, we've had both the federal Liberal government and now the HAWKE government saying that they have legal powers over us. This same Australian Quarterly Journal boasts, in a write-up of the judges in the High Court who they say have left Liberal views, at least the majority of them, they say that the High Court can be expected to support other decisions, such as the Franklin Dam, and they would include that we have to abide by whatever the United States says about Aboriginal land rights. It is the basis of laws such as the so-called Sex Discrimination Bill, and so on. It is an attempt to take away the independence of Australia. Now, we've got a position that the revolution by instalments is being supported by politicians in our own government. I know of no such example, but it is the same type of fight against Australia as was waged against the former colonies of the British Empire, in particular Rhodesia and Kenya as an example. Now, I mentioned how when I was working for that nurses organisation, that the Aborigines who were Christians were victims of a persecution campaign, and that nurses had to put up with the government's proposition that they had to work with medicine men and all sorts of things to take the Aborigines back to the old culture. Now, last year I was doing a tour sponsored by members of the Liberal Party in Western Australia, and while at a meeting in Kununurra, a town in the north of Western Australia, I was approached by two missionaries and a group of Aborigines. The two missionaries were Don and Meg Shedley, evangelical missionaries, and they said, we would like to sponsor a tour for you to speak among the Aborigines. That is, to go to the settlements in the reserve areas and hear what the Aborigines have got to say. And I must say that I was more than surprised, despite my background, as to just how far things had gone. I think you all know how they've closed border areas and the land rights areas already, where you have to have a visa, or call it a permit, or what you want to get in. But in some places that I went to with Don and Meg Shedley in the Kimberley, we had to wait outside the border of the reserve because Christian missionaries were not allowed to go in. And Christian Aborigines had to go in to bring other Aborigines out to meet us. While this was going on, there would be carloads of white activists could drive freely in and out of the areas. You've got left-wing so-called anthropologists preaching the old culture to the Aborigines. I want to put it to you that those Aborigines and Christian missionaries deserve our support. And in order that you would give them support, it is necessary to know something of what they are fighting about. I can't talk to you in any knowledgeable way as a biblical student or a person knowledgeable about theological questions, but I can tell you what I have observed and what I have had evidence of from missionaries and from the Aborigines. Now, before going to Western Australia on this tour with the missionaries, I had the opportunity of speaking to one of the experts among the missionaries, highly respected by all the different missionaries, no matter what their particular persuasions were. And that was Pastor Ulbrich, who passed away just a couple of months ago. He was 89 when I saw him, an experienced Lutheran missionary who went to Central Australia in 1924. And I wanted to know from him, just what is it that you missionaries do for those Aborigines? How is it that you move into an area which is stricken with alcoholism and violence, and then somehow or other you turn the tables, and almost within 24 hours you've got a new society of people who are living together happily, alcoholism no longer exists, violence is stopped, and so on. And the old chap was terribly proud of himself as he gave me the first actual example and experience that he had of it. On his visit to Central Australia in 1924, the first group of Aborigines he came across included a young Aboriginal girl who was dying of yaws. Now, he knew what the treatment was because he'd already also had medical training. But his problem was that this girl believed that she was willed to die, that she was under a spell, and no medical treatment would have cured her. And you should appreciate that, as he explained it to me, that under tribal law, the Aborigines lived in constant fear of evil spirits, spells being cast on them, the Featherfoot men or Kaditcha men, and they never believed that diseases were caused by anything else than spells being cast on them either by individuals or other groups. And when anyone died, they believed that they'd been willed to die. So what Pastor Ulbrich had to explain to this girl was how that if she surrendered herself to Christ, that she would have a God more powerful than all these other evil spirits. Well, he was very proud of the fact that he did convince her to become a Christian, and he was then able to cure her. And he was equally proud of the fact that she then got married, had 8 children, and they've all got children, all running around Alice Springs today. He told me a lot more. I asked him about how to identify what are called sacred sites or sites of significance, etc. His evidence to me and his advice turned out to be right on this tour, where I had a unique opportunity of talking directly to the Aborigines. I've got some 40 tapes, all taken in the presence of witnesses who are Aboriginals and missionaries, in which the Aborigines explained to me why they wanted Christianity, about the war that is taking place against Christianity on all of the settlements. As one young chap said to me, and he's got his young son in front of him, he said, you know, I've only been a Christian for 11 months, and this is the first time I've ever been happy and free in my life. He explained how they'd cured him of alcoholism, how he'd surrendered himself to Christ. The missionaries explained that in their view this means the Holy Spirit enters them. Now, whatever it does, it's quite remarkable. I can only state that mathematically I couldn't have any other explanation of how people could change an entire ethical and moral approach virtually in a matter of hours. And he explained to me how he'd gone through his initiation into tribal life. He explained the terror as a young person of having to be careful everywhere he walked in case he went to the wrong place. He was frightened of spirits and everything. And frightened when a corroboree that if he dropped something he'd get speared. Frightened of devils and evil spirits, which he is no longer frightened of. He now feels comfortable and happy looking after his son. And he explained to me too, just one example of what the Christians call the Holy Spirit coming to them. He said his method of entertaining his young boy, which is a custom among Aborigines, would be to break the legs of a joey, young kangaroo, and give him a stick to poke at it for cruelty. And these Aborigines, when they go Christian, they start looking after their wives. They adopt the concept of the Christian nuclear family. They seem to have absolutely no problem of coping with alcoholism, and they put an end to violence. And the other point that Pastor Albrecht explained to me was the application of the Christian doctrine of reconciliation, in that they would get the various fighting groups together, whether they be tribes or what, and they would explain to them that this Christian God was so powerful that those fights among them and the issues they fought over were of absolutely no significance. This Christian God could solve it all for them. The point is that it actually works. Now that's a question of the utter irresponsibility of the federal government as saying in the name of self-determination that things should be taken out of the hands of the missionaries and the Christian Aborigines. That in the name of self-determination and giving dignity, so-called, to the Aborigines, that they should return to the old culture, which the Aborigines do not want. As a matter of fact, what is being considered now is to bring Aboriginal girls on a tour through the capital cities to say why they do not want this white man's inspired initiative to go back to the old culture, because they don't want to go and marry the old blokes. They like the idea of a young man of their own choice, and they want modern medicine and not the humbug of bone pointing and witch doctors, etc. Now I mentioned to you that I have produced a book called The Evidence. Now in that, among other things, I have shown how the communist movement, including the declarations from Moscow, which were adopted by the Communist Party in Australia, how you had to be very careful, and I was taught this in the Communist Party, we were all atheists. We were taught that in our criticisms of the churches we had to go very careful, because we didn't want to what they called sectarianism. We didn't want to be sectarian and isolate ourselves. But one group they never let up on in their hatred, and that was the missionaries and the missions among the Aborigines. And it's obvious when you tour the settlements and you hear all of the evidence that I did, and I'll tell you this, I not only went to settlement after settlement, but I spoke to a whole convention of Aborigines, or rather moved around talking to them for 7 days. That was at Port Augusta in last January. The missionaries said I had to go there in order to finalise my studies. And the thing is that communism has got no hope at all among the Australian Aborigines while Christianity is there. And apart from sheer irresponsibility and lack of even human feeling towards the welfare of Aborigines, and of course it's the same thing with whites. I mean, we know that our civilisation is based on Christianity. It is really a question of getting the Aborigines back to what Christians might call a pagan or Stone Age belief, because communism cannot coexist with Christianity. I'd only repeat what seems to me to be quite miraculous, and I have no explanation of the effect that Christianity has on them, but the Aborigines do. I appeal to you, those of you particularly in churches, that you should get missionaries, say from the United Missionaries Association of Western Australia, to come and address you, to get full-blood Aborigines to come and speak to you, to get their voice heard. One of the points I've made in Red Over Black is that if you wanted to hear the voice of the true Aborigine in Queensland, that you had to read newspapers like Queensland Country Life, because they were the papers where Aborigines told them what they really thought. The journalists in the major newspapers weren't even interested in talking to them. It comes as a surprise to most people to know that the Queensland Aborigines voted overwhelmingly to support the type of land tenure legislation that the Queensland government has. And I note that in the trade union movement, we are used to organising disputes. It's one of our jobs. We know how to organise demonstrations, etc. And by that means of deductive observation, we could ourselves, the Melbourne Trades Hall, when the build-up to the boycott of the Brisbane Games was on, we could see there the biggest promotion ever made in Australian history to put on a dispute. They had the support of the major television stations and the newspapers. Charlie Perkins was talking about bloodshed in the streets. Hell was going to play. They were going to have thousands of Aborigines. Now, if there was any way possible to get those thousands of Aborigines to demonstrating at Brisbane, then they had all the backup to do it. And all they could get was a relative handful of Aborigines at the front, hardly any of them full-blood Aborigines, although I've got nothing against urban Aborigines. Nobody has. They'd be stupid if they did. They're all our brothers and sisters. But the point is, what was demonstrated with these hundreds of whites behind a handful of Aborigines, that this land rights movement had no support among the Aborigines. While Don and Meg Shedley and I were going through the Kimberley, and we spent 9 days and 9 nights going around in a Toyota truck, we never came across any settlement that was supporting this land rights campaign. One reason being that they've already got land rights, which all Aborigines have got in Australia who require them. But at the same time, there was a campaign being run by an organisation calling itself the Kimberley Land Council. And they were claiming sovereignty over the whole of the Kimberley, claiming that they represented the Aborigines, which they did not. They get plenty of government finance to do this. The revolutionary movement among Aborigines is paid by you, the taxpayer. They get jobs in representing health organisations, so-called, etc., people who couldn't put a bandage on, running around well paid and well assisted by cars, etc., promoting a land rights movement which is alien both to the Aborigines themselves as individuals who want to live together with Australians, and manipulated by a quite alien force that is out to destroy the whole of Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, I repeat to you that what we are discussing is a defence matter. It is up to you to give consideration to it. It's up to you to act on it. And in relation to this, as I said, when we talked about the national and the colonial question, it also dealt with so-called multiculturalism and multiracialism. Now, it's quite absurd for anyone to have anything at all to get against another race of people. It doesn't matter who they are part of one great family of races throughout the planet. But it just so happens that in too large a numbers they do not live together in a very united way. They have different prides and cultures and so on. If you want to know what a multicultural state is, just look at one in the news now, the Lebanon, or Cyprus, or Sri Lanka. And one of the most extraordinary meetings I attended was only recently in Western Australia. I was talking to Aborigines. And I didn't even know that the migration program from Black Africa had commenced to Australia. In Red Over Black, I explained how we'd been taught about these things in the Communist Party, and I quoted from a more recent Marxist textbook saying that we had to have Negro migration to Australia from Haiti and from Black Africa, which, as anyone would know, would cause the same problems they've got in Britain. We've even been warned by Negroes about it. But these Aborigines were the ones who told me about it. They were very emotionally upset. And I can understand it because they're justifiably proud of the fact that they are Australia's black people. And they know that the government is always talking about jobs for Aborigines, which they don't give them. That they bring Asian migrants to have jobs in the post office and they won't give them to young Aborigines, etc. But they believed that the Negro migration program, which at that time, a few weeks ago, was 140, the first batch, with a promise of many more to come, they believe that's going to make the Australian Aboriginal second fiddle to the Negro. Now, nobody consults with them about it. And what I'm putting to you is that the architects behind this know exactly what they're doing. They know that it causes antagonism among the Aborigines. They know and expect that Australia is going to have the multiracial problems of Britain, and they even hope it will get as bad as what it is in the United States. Now, in order to discuss these questions rationally, we've got to knock this smear of the Australian people that they are racist, and to try and frighten people into not discussing or debating immigration issues, which is a defence matter, because of fear of being branded racist. Likewise, we should look to the evidence that is available to Australia as to how Asian governments and master politicians are treating the migration issue in Australia, as distinct from the type of frogs and mice debate that we saw recently or heard recently in the federal parliament, where the real issues were not tackled, where Labor was praising up Malcolm Fraser and his government for having initiated the same scheme that Labor is now pursuing. What we should do is read the evidence from the Asian press itself. The most appropriate one for Australians is one that is sold in our own bookshops and for which you can get copies in any local library, and that is Asia Week. It is the Asian journal that is most widely read that is printed in English in the Asian countries. Now, the March 23rd issue for this year came out with the real views of the manipulators of politics in Asian countries and their views towards Australia. And they were saying that the Australian people are only a relative minority, that this country is too big for such a small people, preparing the way for them to send migration uninvited. And I put it to you that that is an invasion plan. I ask you to read that yourself. And also in the evidence, I've quoted from Bill Hayden, our so-called Minister for Foreign Affairs. Now, he made a statement to Asia Week, the same publication, in which he said that there should be a new race developed in Australia, that because of the Asian migration program, that Asians and whites would intermarry and this new race would appear, a real Dr. Strangelove theory. Anyone who knows Asians, and certainly the journalists who are over there now, say that rather than them thinking that Hayden was paying them a compliment, they felt insulted. They've got no intention of coming to Australia to be guinea pigs, to breed a new race of people. They are quite proud of being Asians. And it's remarkable that this government is so concerned about the preservation of every breed of kangaroo and goanna, but that somehow or other the human race should be absorbed into one race, like getting all the parrots together to make them all one colour. All that sounds weird, and it is weird, and we're talking about people with a long-range objection of the destruction of our society. I would refer you again to my book, Red Over Black, where we were taught this theory in the Communist Party, that a new race should be bred in Australia of Asians and whites. That's nothing against Asians or white people, but it is against the manipulators who want to destroy us. Ladies and gentlemen, what I have discussed with you tonight, I would repeat, is a defence matter. The issue of land rights is to establish a separate, independent nation to be recognised by the United Nations. The migration program is the preparation of an invasion plan. The idea of multiculturalism and multiracialism is to break up the homogeneity of our nation, to mean that we face inevitable defeat. Fortunately, the Australian people are waking up to what it is all about. We've still got a long way to go. We can't have a position where we would re-elect a new federal government that would behave the same as the Fraser government did. And I'm not having a go at any political party. I'm only stating what the issues are. Those of you who come from different ranks, whether you're employers, farmers, or what you are, we all have common interest in the defence of the country. I speak to you as a union man. You may be what you like, but we're all Australians, and this is the basic issue that we have to confront now. One last thing I want to again repeat, that the war to break Christianity among the Aborigines is part and parcel of a quite despicable act against both the Aborigines and us. And those Christian Aborigines, such as represented by the Christian Aboriginal Evangelical Fellowship and the white missionaries who support them, they deserve the support of all their fellow citizens throughout the Commonwealth. It would be a very lengthy process to explain how someone actually breaks from the Communist Party, how they wake up to them, because you're very heavily indoctrinated, and as I've since found out, the process by how you have been brainwashed doesn't become clear until long afterwards. And that when you are being brainwashed, you don't really know what's happening to you. The communist leaders and their lecturers and tutors, they know exactly how to carry out this process of indoctrination of the membership. They go to schools of instruction